I have here 1.4.c, and I've written use understanding of context and needs in adapting teaching to context and needs. Let's face the fact that we could derive a list of user needs. Perhaps the students could derive these themselves, and these could contain a coding of what the context was. The language that you use to interpret the user needs could also be taking account of the context, which was described perhaps in a database or in a text. So the suggestion has been that we can derive a lesson from these user needs. Naively we could derive presumably activities one by one from each user need, but of course there may be far more complex ways of doing it. Another idea that comes to mind is that we could arbitrarily take 2 or 3 of the user needs and use these as some kind of a play activity in a sandpit. Given that we select those particular user needs, we then can generate activities or scripts using those user needs. For example, in generating a lesson from particular user needs, in fact what we might want to do is to simulate the interaction of some people. So what better way to do that than use sandplay? 1.5.a differences in varieties of English, for example, of course, King's English. 1.5b language models for teaching and learning, making informed choices. What does this mean? Well, we can have an n-gram as a language model, which will be very useful. We could also have other kinds of grammars, for example traditional grammar, and no doubt we can combine the two ideas. No doubt we can relate a theory of n-grams to a theory of traditional grammar, and we can use simple contrastive examples. There's no question of trying to spell out all of the sentences that one might say, because there are billions and billions and billions of billions of billions of billions of these. However, what we can do is work with simple contrastive examples, which effectively describe all our grammar, just as a notation like BNF describes our grammar. In the same way, we can explain the full grammar by simple contrastive examples. The kinds of language background and how it might influence the learning of English. This again is similar to the fact that people have different dialects of English. They hear things in different ways. So we have different phonemes in different dialects of English. Now looking at the assignment. A model of the background, 2.1a, a model of the background affecting learning. Well, of course we're talking about two things here. We're talking about the background that each learner has, that each learner brings to the situation, the background that the teacher brings to the situation. We're also talking about the particular environment that these people are in. For example, they could, for example, be in a particular country or a particular school. Let's consider, for a start, all possible models of background affecting learning. And the one I want to focus on here is, how are you programmed to react? So it's how all the participants are programmed to react by their previous experiences. that is going to have an effect on learning. For example, when a particular cue presents itself to one person, they're going to jump in and start attempting to talk, whereas another person might have been conditioned to keep quiet under those circumstances. They may be waiting for other different cues which may not be activated in this particular environment. For example, one person might like much quieter conditions before they start talking. They might be waiting for a meditative state to arise, which is not going to arise in that particular noisy environment. 2.1b, identify the learner's skills and needs. Well, again, we could attempt to relate this to a model of how the person is programmed to react. We could define learners' skills in terms of how they're programmed to react. We could define skill precisely in this way, that a person is able to carry out particular functions described using a finite state machine model. As far as the user's needs are concerned, this would be what kind of environments the user, we can think of this in terms of what kind of environments the user is programmed to seek. And again, this is a question of how they're programmed to react. This is 2.1b by example. I just make the suggestion here that given a list of user skills, of possible user skills and possible user needs, we could devise tests to decide if a user has a particular one of these skills or needs. Obviously, it would be very exhaustive to try and devise a list of all possible skills and all possible needs and to test if the user had them. The closest we could come in that case is to be thinking of vast texts of existing literature, and we could search them. We could search them and see how well the information they provided matched up with what the user knew. And this would be a possibility, given that I think many of us would agree that it would in fact in principle be possible to test a person quite well, say on their knowledge of coffee making, simply by question and answer, provided the questioner had a very good knowledge of the machine that the user was used to working with, the person being tested was used to working with. 2.1.c terminology, leave this for now. 2.1.d, but we can assume that terminology is similar to what you might learn in a linguistics course. 2.1.d, select material and resources. The selections we can make, for example, are to video interactions, or to obtain resources such as texts and engrams that maybe already exist or maybe that we can create ourselves. 2.1e, a reason for specific activities for a particular learner. The reason, okay, now the reason, this has got to be worked out. First of all, we accept that it's a naive concept that we're working with, that the person has particular skills or needs, and that we want to pick activities that allow them to develop those particular skills, or to work on those particular needs. And this could be done intuitively as a basis of what we already know. We could think, however, in terms of some kind of finite state machine model that's going to help us here in explaining the activities that we choose. Define, select, reference and the information. This is already being done. Thank you. We're up to 9:31.